My name is Joanna Pryce, and I am 33 years old. Days ago, my mother knocked on my front door in a camel wool coat and a smile she reserves for people she wants something from. She was carrying a gift basket with a blue bow. She said she wanted to meet the baby. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the phone I had held in one hand and the steering wheel in the other at 11:42 on a Friday night while I drove myself to the hospital in active labor. I thought about what she had said when I called. I thought about the 6 days of silence after my son was born. Then I said 2 words that ended 31 years of accommodating people who had decided long ago that I was the daughter who did not require tending. I said, "Which baby?" She stared at me the way people stare when a script they have always relied on stops working. Maybe I had finally stopped feeding it lines. Because 5 days before she appeared on my porch, while I was 40 weeks pregnant and having contractions 8 minutes apart, my mother had been at my aunt's birthday dinner at a restaurant in the private room they had booked 2 months in advance, and when I called, she had told me to call my husband. My husband was in Glasgow. His flight did not land for 7 more hours. She knew that. She had known it when she chose the reservation. Welcome. This is a place where real things get said by people who have been quiet too long. Drop a comment wherever you are. Subscribe if you are new. Stay with me. Let me take you back to where this started. I grew up in Marlow, a small town on the Thames in Berkshire, England, the kind of town that photographs well and smells like cut grass in summer and old money in autumn. My father, Colin, was a civil barrister with chambers in London who commuted on the train 4 days a week, and who was, by temperament and by choice, a man who handled everything from a slight remove. He was not cold. He was careful. He had learned, in the way that men in his profession learn things, to present a composed surface to every room he entered, including the ones in his own home. My mother, Sandra, ran the household and the family's social calendar with the precision of a senior partner managing a difficult client portfolio. She chaired the village fete committee for 11 years. She organized Christmas parties that people looked forward to from September. She was warm and capable and present for everything that could be organized in advance. Unscheduled need, particularly the kind that arrived in the middle of something she had already planned, was a category she did not handle well. Then there was my sister, Harriet. 4 years younger, effortlessly social, the one who could walk into a room and make it feel warmer. Harriet had married young, a solicitor named Paul from a family my mother approved of thoroughly, and had produced 2 children, Archie and Bea, at what my mother described as sensible intervals. They lived 20 minutes away in a village even prettier than ours. My mother was at Harriet's on Thursdays. She minded Archie and Bea on the days that suited. She was, with Harriet's family, the grandmother she showed people when she was showing what a grandmother could be. With me it was different. Not with active unkindness. My mother had never been actively unkind. The quality of her affection was more architectural than that. She had built a structure and Harriet fitted it exactly, and I fitted it slightly wrong from the start in ways that accumulated over years into a shape I could not name until the night I drove myself to hospital and named it in the quiet dark of a car at 11:42 with my hands on the wheel and a contraction making my vision white. I am an orchestral librarian at a concert hall in Reading. I catalog and prepare scores and parts for the orchestra, manage the music library, coordinate with conductors and publishers, track rentals and licenses. It is a job that requires the particular kind of intelligence that is comfortable with complexity and invisible until something goes wrong, which in my experience is the kind of intelligence that goes unnoticed longest. My mother had said once at a dinner with friends that I worked with music, in the vague, comfortable voice she used when she had not fully processed what I did. She did not mean anything by it. That was the point. She had never needed to process it fully because it had never been a thing she needed to present. I met Daniel at a concert 3 years ago. He was visiting from Edinburgh, a structural engineer at a firm with offices in both cities. He was quiet in a way that was different from my father's quietness. My father's quiet came from professional habit. Daniel's came from actually paying attention. He came to the concert because a colleague had given him a spare ticket and he had never been to an orchestral concert before, and he sat in the row in front of me, and at the interval he turned around and said he did not understand what the cellos had done in the third movement and could I explain it. I explained it for 20 minutes. He said he wanted to come to the next one. He came to the next 8. We were together by the 4th. We married quietly, 14 months later, registry office and reading with 8 people and dinner afterward at a restaurant we loved. My mother attended. She wore a pale gray dress and said it was lovely in the tone she used when she had hoped for more notice. Daniel's mother, Fiona, wore a yellow skirt and cried twice and danced with Daniel's father in the restaurant while the other tables watched. My mother sat with my father and Colin poured wine and said the right things in his barrister's manner, and the evening was pleasant and arranged and not quite full. Daniel's work took him between Reading and Edinburgh, more Edinburgh than Reading in the past year because the firm had a major infrastructure project there. We had talked about moving. We had not yet moved. He was in Edinburgh more than he was home, and I had managed this because managing things alone was a skill I had been developing since childhood. When I found out I was pregnant, I called my mother. She was pleased. She said she would call Harriet. She called Harriet before she called me back to say she was pleased. I know because Harriet texted me while I was still on the phone with my mother. "Congratulations, Joanna. Mum just told me." My mother came back on the line and said she was so glad and that she hoped Daniel would be able to be around more. "His firm has to understand these things," she said. She meant it helpfully. She meant everything helpfully. Fiona, Daniel's mother, drove down from Edinburgh on a Saturday 3 weeks later with a boot full of things she had been quietly assembling since the moment Daniel called her. Receiving blankets she had found at a charity shop and washed and folded. A book on infant sleep she had read and annotated in the margins with tiny notes. A handwritten card that said, "Joanna, you are already so good at this and you haven't started yet. I love you both." We sat in the kitchen for 4 hours and she asked me everything and I told her everything, and she did not once check her phone or redirect the conversation to someone else. She was the one who made me see it. Not in the way you see something when it is shown to you. In the way you see it when someone is so genuinely present with you that the comparison writes itself. My mother had called 3 times since I told her the news. All 3 calls had ended with news about Archie or B. Not meanly. Just naturally. As if my pregnancy was the context and Harriet's children were the main subject. Fiona asked nothing about anyone but me and Daniel and the baby for 4 hours and never once seemed to be waiting for her turn. There is a moment I need to tell you about. I was 7 years old. My school had an end-of-term concert. I had been chosen to play the opening piece on recorder, a distinction that meant something to me with the seriousness only children bring to small honors. Practiced for 3 weeks. I told my mother twice a week. She said she would be there. On the morning of the concert, my father's chambers called about a case and Colin drove to London. My mother drove him to the station because that was what was needed. The concert started at 2. She arrived at 2:40 after I had played. She had missed the piece. She hugged me and said she was sorry and that she had been held up and she was sure I had been wonderful. She bought me a twirl on the way home. I ate the chocolate and did not say anything and filed the event in the part of me that was learning very early what kind of showing up I could count on. I thought about that concert often in the years after. Not with bitterness, with clarity. There was a pattern. When things were scheduled and organized in advance, my mother was there. She was genuinely there. She had made every graduation, every wedding, every dinner where someone was invited to assess the family. What she did not do reliably was show up for the unplanned thing, the thing that arrived without asking permission, the thing that needed her before she had arranged herself for it. That pattern held for 31 years. I had accommodated it so long I had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a slight lean in the floor of a room you have lived in for years. I just adjusted my balance and walked around it. Pregnancy was not easy. I had severe pelvic girdle pain from 20 weeks that made walking difficult and sleep nearly impossible. I worked from home where I could and came into the hall 2 days a week and sat at my desk with a cushion and a hot water bottle and got through it the way I got through most things, by doing what needed doing and not making a particular production of the difficulty. My manager, a woman named Ruth who had run the library for 18 years and who I trusted completely, covered my floor shifts without being asked. She sent me scores digitally so I didn't have to retrieve them from the stacks. She left me a box of those soft biscuits I liked at my desk every Monday. She told me once that the best thing about having someone competent in a job was that competence creates space for everyone, including yourself. It was the most professional compliment I had ever received, and I kept it. Daniel was in Edinburgh for the last 6 weeks. Project had a critical delivery phase and he could not leave. We had talked about this. We had a plan. Plan was that Fiona would come when labor started. She was 4 hours by train from Edinburgh and had told me at least 8 separate times in the preceding month to call her the moment anything began, and she would be on the next available service without discussion. My mother lived 40 minutes away. I had asked her in September whether she might be available when the time came. She had said, of course, absolutely, let her know. I had believed her because she had said it the way she said things she meant in the moment. In October, she had told me about Aunt Helen's birthday dinner. My father's sister. They were doing a private room at a restaurant in Windsor on the 14th of November, 30 people. It had been booked since August. I was due on the 18th. My mother said she was sure the timing would be fine. I said I hoped so too. I filed the information in the part of me that had been filing information for 31 years. If you are still here, please subscribe. What comes next is the part one have not said out loud to anyone except Daniel and Fiona and Ruth. Not because it is hard to say. 'Cause until recently I did not have the words for it that were clean enough to be useful. The 14th of November. Friday. I was 40 weeks. Daniel was in Edinburgh. His flight home was on Saturday morning, the first available after the project delivered on the Thursday. He had asked about an earlier flight twice and been told the delivery date was firm. He was booked on the 7:30 Saturday morning from Edinburgh to Heathrow, landing at 9:15. We had the plan. Fiona was ready to come. I had been having Braxton Hicks for 2 weeks, occasional and irregular and unconvincing. On the evening of the 14th at 9:30, while I was in the bath attempting to manage the hip pain that had been worse for 2 days, the first real contraction arrived. I knew the difference immediately. It was the difference between a rehearsal and the performance. I got out of the bath. I sat on the bed. I waited. 8 minutes. Another contraction. Clear, definitive, serious. I called Daniel first. He picked up immediately. He said he would find a flight. Any flight. I told him to try but to stay calm and that I was going to call Fiona. He said he loved me. Called Fiona. She picked up on the second ring. She had been, she told me later, watching a program with her bag already packed beside the sofa since the 1st of November. She said she would be on the last train that left in 50 minutes and she would be with me by 2 in the morning. She said she was already putting her coat on while she spoke. I believed her. I trusted her completely. Then I called my mother. She was at the restaurant. I could hear the restaurant around her voice when she answered, the low, warm roar of a full private room, cutlery and conversation. I told her. My contractions are 7 minutes apart. I think this is it. She said, oh goodness. Then she said, Daniel is on his way? In Edinburgh, I said. His flight is tomorrow morning. Fiona is coming, but she won't be here until 2. Can you come? A pause. The pause that I had heard at the school concert, at the birthday party I did not tell you about yet, at the summer event she had arrived 40 minutes late for because she had forgotten to check the time. Pause that meant she was calculating what she could afford. Joanna, we're right in the middle of your aunt's birthday. Your father is giving a toast. There are 30 people here. Could you call someone else? Is there a friend who could sit with you until Fiona arrives? I held the phone in my hand. Contraction released. 6.5 minutes since the last. I said, "There is no one else, Mum." She said, "I am sure it will be slow at first. First labors almost always are. Call the hospital and see what they say. Tell them you'll come in when they're closer." She said this in the warm, practical voice she used when she was being helpful. It was genuinely helpful advice. It was also a way of not coming. I said, "All right." I ended the call. I sat on the edge of the bed for 1 full minute. The next contraction came at 6 minutes. Called the hospital. The midwife said at 40 weeks with regular contractions I should come in to be assessed. I said I would be there shortly. I called Fiona back. She was at Waverley Station. She said she would be there. I told her I was going to the hospital now. She said she would come directly there. She did not ask why I was going alone. She understood. She had understood before I had. I picked up the bag I had packed at 37 weeks. I put on my shoes. The sensible flat ones I wore to the library. I had worn them every day for 3 years. I walked to the car. I sat in the driver's seat and held the wheel for a moment and looked at the street outside. The November dark, the streetlight on the pavement, the ordinary residential quiet of a Friday night. Then I put the car in gear and I drove. 19 minutes to the Royal Berkshire. 3 contractions. Each one 6 minutes from the last. Each one longer than the previous. I drove the way I prepared scores for concerts, with complete attention to the task and nothing wasted on anything else. I did not cry. I did not call my mother back. I counted the traffic lights. 4. I counted the roundabouts. 3. The midwife who met me at the assessment unit was named Bridget. 50s, efficient, the kind of steadiness that comes from having seen everything without having stopped caring about any of it. She asked where my birth partner was. "On a train from Edinburgh," I said, "arriving around 2. She looked at me. I drove myself. She did not ask anything else. She took my arm and brought me in. At midnight my phone lit up. It was the family WhatsApp group. My mother had been added to it when Harriet created it 2 years ago for family announcements. My mother had written at 11:58, "Joanna went into labor tonight. Everything is in hand," she says. She has called the hospital. Colin and I are heading home shortly. Prayers for a smooth arrival. Then Harriet, "Oh, exciting. How long to go do you think?" Then my mother, "No idea, she's managing it her way. She'll let us know. She's managing it her way." I read that lying in the hospital bed in active labor with Bridget checking the monitor and Fiona somewhere on a train in the dark, and I understood something I had been walking around for 31 years like furniture I had memorized the position of. My mother had written me out of the sentence. She's managing it her way. As if I had chosen to drive myself to hospital at midnight at 40 weeks as a stylistic preference. As if going alone was something I had selected because it suited my particular personality. Not because I had called her and she had stayed at the dinner. I put the phone face down on the bedside table. Bridget looked at me. "You all right?" "Fine," I said. She nodded. She was the kind of person who accepted fine from people who were not fine and then went on being exactly as present as before. She handed me a cup of water. "Drink this." I drank it. If this is going somewhere you recognize, drop a word in the comments. Subscribe if you have not yet. What Fiona said when she walked through that door at 1:50 in the morning changed the shape of things. Fiona arrived at 1:50. She came through the door in her yellow waterproof and her practical shoes with mud on the hem of her trousers from the station, and she looked at me and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I'm here, Joanna. I have you." She pulled the chair beside the bed and she sat in it and she held my hand and she was, for the next 3 hours, exactly what she had always been. Present. Completely, without reservation, without one eye on anything else. Edward Daniel Pryce was born at 5:17 in the morning on the 15th of November. 3.4 kilograms. Dark hair. eyes that could not decide what color they were. He looked, from the first moment, like a person who was already paying attention to things. Bridget said he was perfect. She said it in the plain professional way that made it more convincing. Fiona held him while I was being seen to, and she talked to him in a low voice in the way she talked to everything she was fond of. I watched her hold my son and thought about 19 minutes in a car in the dark and about the shape of the word choice. Daniel landed at Heathrow at 9:19. He was at the hospital by 10:40. He had taken a taxi from the airport and paid an amount he refused to tell me for a week. He walked in the door and looked at Edward in my arms and sat down on the edge of the bed and said nothing for a while. He was the kind of man who went quiet when things were too large for words, which was one of the reasons I had married him. 0 calls from my family that morning. 0 texts. At noon, Harriet sent a message to the family group. "Anyone heard from Joanna?" Then my mother, "She'll let us know when she's ready." Then my father, "Thinking of you, Joe." The thinking of you with no question mark. Kind of thought that does not require a response and therefore requires nothing. I did not post anything. I did not announce. I lay in the hospital bed with Daniel on one side and Fiona on the other and Edward between us, and I felt very clearly the difference between the family I had been born into and the family that had come to meet me in the dark. Fiona stayed for 2 days. She slept on the camp bed the hospital provided, and she got up in the night and she made tea at 5 in the morning and she told Daniel to sleep when he needed to, and she did all of this with the matter-of-fact competence of a woman who understood that being needed was not a burden when you loved the person. She called her husband from the corridor twice. She went home on Monday morning and kissed Edward on the forehead and told him he was entirely himself, and that was entirely enough. My mother came on the Tuesday. She came with flowers and a knitted blanket from the woman at her craft group, and she stood in the doorway of the room with the slightly uncertain air of a person who has arrived to a place where something has already happened without them. She looked at Edward. "Oh," she said. "Oh, he's beautiful." She meant it. I do not doubt she meant it. But I noticed that she said it to the room rather than to me. She held him for 12 minutes, I counted, and then she put him back and asked if I had everything I needed. I said yes. She asked how long Fiona had stayed. 2 days, I said. She nodded. She said that was very good of her. She said it warmly and without hearing what she was saying. She stayed for 40 minutes. She hugged me when she left. She smelled of her usual perfume and she said, "Let me know if you need anything," and I said I would. I sat in the room after she left and looked at Edward in his hospital cot and thought about the family WhatsApp message. She's managing it her way. I thought about 31 years of managing it my way. I thought about the recorder concert when I was 7. I thought about whether it was possible to love someone genuinely and still choose the dinner. I thought about it for a long time and I did not reach a conclusion that changed anything practical. 2 days later, Harriet called. She was warm and excited and she said she could not wait to meet him and she was sorry she had not been in touch sooner. Paul had been away and she had had both children unwell. She said Mum had mentioned that Daniel had been in Edinburgh, and had I been all right managing on my own? She said it in the genuine concerned voice of a person who did not have the full picture. I said I had not been entirely on my own. She said, "Oh, who had been there?" "Fiona," I said. "She came on the train from Edinburgh." Harriet was quiet for a moment. She said, "Mum didn't go?" I said, "She was at Aunt Helen's dinner." Harriet said nothing for 5 seconds. Then she said, "Right." She said it the way you say right when you need time to process something. She said she would come at the weekend. She came. She held Edward for an hour and she was entirely present and she did not look past him, and I found it easier to love her for being there than to resent her for all the other things. My mother arrived on the 6th day since the birth with the camel coat and the gift basket and the smile she saved for situations she was managing. She had called ahead from the car, which was the minimum notice she judged appropriate. I opened the door. I looked at the basket. Blue bow. Selected in advance. She had known the gender since I told her at 16 weeks. She said, "Joanna, I've come to see the baby." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "Which baby?" She stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly. "What do you mean?" I said, "You did not have a grandson on Friday night. You did not have one on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. You had 30 people at a birthday dinner and a husband giving a toast and a daughter in labor who called you from her car on the way to hospital. That was 6 days ago. So which baby are you here to see?" Her face went through several things. I had seen all of them before. The recalibration. The pivot. The new angle. "Joanna, I was at your Aunt Helen's birthday." I explained this. "It was 30 people." I said, "I know, Mum." She said, "I thought you had Fiona coming." I said, "Fiona arrived at 1:50 in the morning. She came on the last train from Edinburgh. She came from 4 hours away. You are 40 minutes away." My mother opened her mouth. "I have nothing more to say about the dinner," I said. I closed the door. Not loudly. The latch clicked. The gift basket sat on the step. Daniel was in the kitchen. He had heard. He did not come out immediately. He let me stand in the hallway for a moment before he appeared with Edward in the crook of his arm. I looked at my son's face. He was looking at the ceiling with the absorbed attention he gave to light fittings and trees and anything that moved slowly. Daniel put his free arm around me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. My father called 20 minutes later. His voice had the careful quality it had in court when he was approaching something difficult. "Joe, your mother is quite upset." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "She didn't realize you felt quite so strongly about it." I said, "Dad." I said it quietly. "She told me to call someone else. She said first labors were always slow. She stayed at the dinner. I drove myself." He was silent for a moment. A silence I recognized from a lifetime of watching him hold things and not put them down. Then he said, "I should have been the one to take you." I said nothing. He said, "I should have told Helen we needed to go." His voice had something in it that was not his usual quality. Not the barrister's composure. Something underneath it. I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "Is he well?" "Yes, he's well. He's very well." A pause. "Good," he said. He said it with such plainness that it landed more heavily than anything elaborate would have. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen and thought about him. He was a man who had chosen peace for 30 years and who had just come as close as he knew how to come to saying he was sorry. It was not all the way, but it was the nearest I had heard him get. Harriet texted an hour after my father called. "Mum told me what happened at the door. Joe, I just need to say I think she handled this wrong from the start." She didn't say more than that. She did not excavate or analyze. She just said it and left it. I wrote back, "Thank you, Harriet." She replied, "I love you." I wrote, "I love you too." It was the most honest exchange we had had in years. What I was not prepared for was what my mother did next. Not a call. Campaign. Over the following week, she contacted 4 members of the extended family with a version of events in which I had been struggling with the adjustment to motherhood and had become difficult about visitors. She did not use the phrase postnatal depression. She was too careful for that. She used the phrase not quite herself and finding it all very overwhelming and just needs time. The language of concern that carries the implication of instability. She had learned over 31 years that the best response to being held to account was to reframe the person doing the holding as fragile. I found out from my cousin Gemma, who called on a Wednesday and said in her careful way, "I just wanted to check in. Your mum mentioned you were having a hard time." I said, "What did she say specifically?" Gemma told me. I said, "Thank you for calling me directly." And then I told her. Not everything. The essential facts. The date. The time. The contraction intervals. The drive. The 1:50 arrival of Fiona. The 6 days. Gemma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "God, Joanna." She said it with genuine feeling. I said, "Yes." She said, "I had no idea." I said, "I know." I did not call the rest of the family. I did not write a message. I did the same thing with each person who called, which was to answer one question. Ask her what time she arrived at the hospital. I said it to 3 people over 4 days. Not one of them called me back with a counterpoint. My mother called on the Thursday. She said she wanted to try again. She wanted to come and see Edward properly. I said, "You can come." I did not say "you are welcome" because I was not yet sure that was true, but I believed in not closing doors with locks that could not be removed because I had seen what that kind of closure does over decades and I did not want to build that structure for my son to navigate. She came on the Friday. She held Edward for longer this time. She sat at my kitchen table and I made tea and we did not speak about the dinner or the drive or the door. I looked at her holding my son and I felt 2 things simultaneously, which is the particular mathematics of loving a difficult parent. The grief for what was not there and the clear sight of what was. She loved him. She loved him in the present tense, with her full attention, for the 45 minutes she sat at that table. That was real. And the drive was real. Both things were true at the same time. Before she left, she said, "I should have come on the Friday." It was 3 sentences in one. She said it looking at her hands. She did not elaborate and I did not ask her to. I said yes. She nodded. She put on her coat. She said she would come again next week if I wanted. I said that would be fine. 6 weeks after Edward was born, Fiona came back to reading. She stayed for 4 days. She arrived on a Tuesday with her bag and her good sense and immediately took over the kitchen in the way she always did, without asking and without making it a gesture. She cooked things from scratch. She sorted the pile of correspondence on the hall table that neither Daniel nor I had got to. She sat with Edward in the afternoon while I slept for 2 hours in complete darkness for the first time since before the birth. When I woke up, she had made tea and was reading in the armchair with Edward on her lap, both of them quiet in the lamplight. I sat in the kitchen doorway and looked at that. Fiona in the armchair. Edward on her lap. The particular quality of a person who is completely where they are. I thought about my mother at 7 and the twirl she bought me on the way home from the concert she missed. It was not that she had not loved me. She had. Chocolate was real. The love was real. What was not reliable was the being there. And being there, I understood in a kitchen doorway in December with my son asleep on his grandmother's lap, was the only currency that actually spent. Ruth came to see Edward on a Thursday afternoon on her way home from the hall. She brought a card from the whole music library team signed by everyone. She sat at the kitchen table and held him and said, "He has your focus." She meant it as an observation, not a compliment, which is how Ruth gave compliments, accurately and without decoration. She stayed for an hour. Before she left, she said, "Your chair is there when you're ready, no rush at all, Joanna." I said I would be back in January. She said the library would still be in reasonable order. She had been filing things under my system exactly as I had left it. This was the most generous thing anyone had said to me in months. I understood why immediately. She had not said the library would manage without me. She had said she had been maintaining what I built. There is a difference. My father came alone one afternoon in the 2nd week of December. He had not called ahead. He knocked at the door, which was unusual. He had always simply rung the bell. I opened it. He was in his overcoat with a small paper bag in his hand from the bookshop in Marlow. He held it out. "For the boy. For when he's old enough." I took it. Inside, a copy of a book I had loved as a child. He had given me the same book at 6. I had not known he remembered. He came in. He held Edward. He sat for half an hour without saying very much, and what he said was mainly about Edward and about nothing in particular, and about how the drive from Marlow had been fine except for the roadworks outside Twyford. Before he left, he paused in the doorway. He said, "I should have driven you." He had said it on the phone. He said it again in person, and this time it landed differently, in the body rather than just the ear. I said, "I know, Dad." He put his hand briefly on my arm. Just once. Then he put his coat on and walked to his car. I stood in the doorway and watched him drive away and thought about 31 years of a man who had loved me carefully from a distance and who was now, in the particular way available to him, trying to close some of it. Christening was not a Sunday service with 62 people. We are not a church family. We had a naming ceremony in our sitting room on a Saturday in January with 23 people. Fiona and Daniel's father Alan, who had taken the train down from Edinburgh. Ruth and her partner, Gemma, Harriet and Paul and Archie and Bea, Daniel's colleagues Tom and Priya, who had become our friends, Bridget the midwife, who I had asked and who had said she had never been to a naming before and would love to come, my parents. I had invited them because they were Edward's grandparents and because I believed in Edward having the family he had, all of it, with clear eyes about what it was. I had asked my father to read something. He said yes immediately and asked what I wanted. I said I would like him to read something he chose. He read, in his careful barrister's voice, a short passage about the particular kind of love that is not arranged but simply arrives and stays. I do not know where he found it. He did not say. When he sat down, his face had the quality it had had in the doorway when he said he should have driven me. Something underneath the composure. Real and not performed. I had asked Fiona to say a few words. She stood in the sitting room with Edward in her arms, and she said what she said the way she said everything, directly and without preamble. She said that Edward had arrived into a world full of people who loved him and that loving someone meant answering when they called, and she knew for certain that he would be answered because she had watched his parents answer each other and answer everyone around them for 3 years, and a child learned what he lived, and this one was going to learn showing up. The room was quiet for a moment. My mother, seated near the window, was looking at her hands. She did not look up for several seconds. When she did, she looked at Edward. Just at Edward. With something on her face that I had not seen there before and could not entirely name. Not guilt, not performance. Something earlier than both. Something that was working out what it had missed. I did not speak to her about it that day. I talked to her about Edward and about the tea and about Archie's school project and the weather on the drive from Marlow and all the ordinary things that exist alongside the difficult ones, because that is what the ordinary things are for. The book my father brought is on the shelf in Edward's room. Fiona's receiving blankets are in the drawer. Ruth's card is on the kitchen windowsill. The driving shoes I wore to the hospital are by the back door. I have not put them away. Not as a monument. Not as a reminder to anyone else. 'Cause they are good shoes, comfortable and worn in, and I walk in them every day now, to the park with Edward in the pram, to the corner shop, around the quiet December streets of Reading in the winter light. New ground, same shoes. Everywhere I go. I used to think that what I wanted from my mother was to have the kind of mother she was with Harriet. I do not think that anymore. What I want is simpler, and I have already found most of it. I want to know that when I call from somewhere dark and difficult, the person on the other end will come. Not arrange to come. Not plan to come when the timing is better. Come. I have that now. In Daniel. In Fiona. In Ruth. In Bridget, who had never met me before and still took my arm and brought me inside and wrote in a chart and gave me water and stayed for hours because that was what the moment required. My mother is working toward it. I believe that. I am letting her work toward it at the pace available to her because that is the only pace there is. Edward is 8 weeks old. He has begun smiling. Not reflexively. Actually smiling, at faces he recognizes, at Daniel's voice from the other room, at Fiona on the video call she makes every Sunday morning. Last week he smiled at my mother when she held him, and she made a sound I had not heard her make in 31 years of knowing her. A sound of complete surprise. As if something had arrived without warning and she had not had time to arrange herself for it. as if for once the unplanned thing had reached her before she could manage it into something else. I thought about that sound all evening after she left. I thought about how some things take a lifetime to teach and arrive in an 8-week-old's face. I thought about my father reading his passage in his careful voice. I thought about Fiona on the last train from Edinburgh in her yellow waterproof with the mud on her trousers. I thought about 19 minutes in a car in the dark and what I had named in the quiet of that drive. And I thought that all of it, every piece of it, was exactly as it had to be for me to be sitting here with this child who looks at light fittings and smiles at voices he knows and has not yet learned to manage anything. He just receives. He just responds. He has no architecture yet for keeping people at the right distance. I am in no hurry to teach him any. That is my story. A dinner party, a drive in the dark, and a door that I finally knew how to close. If this reminded you that love is a verb and the verb is showing up, drop a comment, subscribe, and share it with someone who is waiting for people who may not come. See you in the next one.